Hello, this is Jared Jones. This is another episode of Modern Western Buddhism, and we are covering the topic of how to train in meditation according to the tradition of Kamalashila as interpreted through the lens of the Gelug Tibetan Buddhist tradition. However, this discussion has also been modified using resources from Zen, resources from a number of other meditative traditions, within reason. Last time we were discussing basically the things that stop you from meditating. And I think for most of us, this is a very relatable topic. I mean, we may think that meditation is kind of a good idea. We may be convinced sort of, that there are some benefits like having less pain in your body, or being a little more focused, or having a mind that's a little more calm. Maybe we feel like it helps us get along with other people a little better. But for some reason, we can't get motivated and stay motivated to train in meditation at a high level. And the intention of this course is to provide you with the tools that are found in the Pali tradition, the sort of middle period of Indian Buddhism, and the Tibetan tradition, as well as a bit from Zen and a bit from other places, because samadhi is a universal mental quality found in the religious traditions, I think, of every major mystical tradition / meditative tradition on earth. All that being said, in the Buddhist tradition, and in particular the stream that comes through Venerable Kamalashila in the Middle Indian period, is absolutely astonishing, absolutely crystal clear about what it is you need to do, and basically how you work with yourself to keep yourself going, right? The biggest problem is that most of us aren't consistent. And why aren't we consistent? One, because maybe we're aimed at something that isn't high enough, right? We're aimed at something like getting rid of pain in the body. And so on those days where the body feels pretty good, we don't sit down and meditate. Or we're aimed at getting attention from other people, right? We want to be able to sit just well enough to get praise and to get admiration and these other things. And once we're getting sufficient praise and admiration, there's no reason to sit as much, right? And so the first task is to aim our intent firmly at the actual results of the training. That's the first major task. It's an ongoing struggle because our mind is constantly driven towards other goals, other things, while we're sitting. The second one is, once we're aimed at the proper task, once we're aimed at the proper goal or target, then we have to energize that aim. We have to energize that aim and give it enough power and force that it can overcome all of our other tendencies to do very little, or to do not much, or to do something else. Yes? Okay. So last time we covered a couple of things. We covered mainly, though, the benefits of calm abiding. Why? Well, when you look at Venerable Kamalashila's way of getting motivated to meditate, at least as a beginner student, he says this: just like anything else in your life, if you want to lose 10 pounds, first you need to think a lot about, if I lose 10 pounds, I'll be more attractive, I'll be more fit, my health will be better, I'll be more energized, I can do this, I can do that. You have to think about all the benefits, everything you're going to get in a small, me, personal kind of way. I'm going to get it, right? And by thinking about all these benefits for me, this little me in there, then you go, I've got to have it. And that drive, I've got to have that goal of losing 10 pounds or 20 pounds, right? That drive, that attachment, that clinging, right, is what keeps you motivated, keeps you energized to work out every day, even though it hurts, even though Progress is slow, even though after the first 5 pounds goes, the next 15 are really hard and they come off like 10 times as slow as the first 5, blah, 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 right? Doesn't matter. You have set a firm intention, you are highly motivated, and you will get to the goal, as long as that motivation stays intact and as long as your intention doesn't veer off somewhere else. So, in exactly the same way, right? Going from setting a proper intention, knowing what the goal is, to understanding the benefits of that goal, then we generate the desire. We generate the aspiration, they would say. But really, it's a desire. You want it. You want to have it, right? There's nothing mystical about this. You understand what it is. You understand all the benefits of having it, and you want it. You want it really bad. This is not rocket science. This is such straightforward psychology. It's really carrot and stick kind of psychology. So, last time we discussed all the benefits. Yes, this is the first method of getting yourself motivated to do the training. So what are the benefits? The benefits can be sort of boiled down to a few key things, right? The most important benefit, the primary benefit, the actual real reason you're doing this, is to create or discover or uncover, whichever model you'd like to use, a state of mind which is capable of doing what you want it to do, when you want it to do it, for as long as is necessary for it to be done. In other words, your mind goes where you want, when you want it to, and it stays there as long as needed. This is the skill that you need. Why? Well, if you're involved in sort of further, deeper meditative technologies, this is a gateway capability. You can't do the more profound practices if you can't do this with your mind. Not only that, we covered some of the scientific literature last time about pliancy. Mental pliancy is actually the demarcator of having attained samadhi, right? If you don't have pliancy, then you don't have samadhi. This is a very simple formula. So, in other words, if you cannot sit absolutely comfortable for 48 hours on your cushion without even a whiff of the process of becoming distracted, not even being distracted, but not even a whiff of the very process that is becoming distracted in a future moment, right? Not even the tendency to move off your object is there, completely gone, right? And we're going to cover this in great detail later on. But if you can't do that, then you don't have samadhi, right? And if that capability isn't as easy as breathing, you don't have samadhi. And some people watching this may have been meditating a very, very, very long time. They may have very stable meditation. They may have very clear meditation, right? Meaning that the mind is highly awake, highly discerning, highly stable. But that's not yet samadhi. It's not samadhi until you have shintu jinwa, until you have pliancy, mental and physical pliancy. Very critical point. Mental and physical pliancy we covered in the sort of the scientific side of this phenomenon gives you the ability to sit basically as long as you want, because the body becomes highly energized, the mind becomes highly energized. There is a blissful, pleasurable, enjoyable bodily and mental sensation that arises from basically gaining the first level of samadhi, and it is persistent. Even in between sessions, anytime the mind rests on ordinary things that you're doing, the pliancy can re-arise. And there's good scientific data indicating that as well. We can't say it's conclusive from the scientific side, but there's all sorts of data that pretty much says, if we extrapolate this data only slightly, we end up with all of the qualities of pliancy. You don't have to believe this on faith. You can take it on empiricism. So this is the primary quality that you're seeking to gain, right? Pliancy of mind. This pliancy of mind also involves a complete lack of bias, a complete lack of being caught up with your own bullshit from your past, both sort of conceptual things and emotional things, which are also conceptual things according to Buddhist psychology. And therefore, in that state of mind, you can do extraordinary things with the mind. You can do incredibly subtle analyses of both external phenomenon and the mind itself. And you can do so without the bias that comes from your previous experiences. This is the main benefit. In other words, all this talk in Buddhism of being able to see things as they really are is just talking about this. Seeing things as they really are is seeing them in the absence of all of the BS that you would normally bring to the table, right? How do you get the BS off your back before you sit down at the table? You take off the backpack, right? You put the luggage down. You leave it at the door. You leave it outside the door. Whatever analogy you want to use. This is the primary benefit, right? Secondly, as I said, there is no chance, zero, not a single chance, that you will attain a state of stable liberation from internally disturbing mental states and emotional states, unless you can do this first, according to Buddhist psychology. Further, if you are inclined in sort of the Buddhist direction, and you think as some of the Pali tradition thinkers and most of the Mahayana thinkers, that in some way, shape, or form, that a Buddha has a mind that is omniscient. In other words, that it can either know whatever object it turns to, or it's unobstructed from knowing all objects simultaneously. Whichever model you find sort of comfortable at this stage is not so important. The most important thing is that without this first capability, without gaining samadhi or shamatha or shine or whichever term you'd like to use, here I'm using the terms stabilizing meditation and calm abiding. Without that capability, you can't gain liberation and you can't gain enlightenment. So, if you want liberation or enlightenment, you need this capability first. So, one of the tremendous benefits is you can attain liberation or enlightenment if you want to, once you have that capability. I mean, your mind is going to be such a nice place to be, even with that capability. Just that capability alone, your mind is so much more calm, more relaxed, more flexible. Long before you have that capability, just the ability to make your mind do what you want it to do, even at just sort of a slightly elevated level from what you could before. Every level of new capability is so nice, so much better than the previous level. So long before you even gain the capability, you have all of these benefits that your mind is just becoming more and more useful, more helpful, more friendly, a better place to be, right? You're going to have to be with the mind for a long time before you realize there's nobody else, nowhere else, nothing else but what you can access through mind. Long before awakening, the mind becomes peaceful and content. It fills the body with energy and bliss or delight or pleasure. Mental pliancy of fully developed stabilizing meditation is a prerequisite for analytic meditation or vipassana. So once again, yes, this term vipassana is kind of thrown around, and in the modern mindfulness movement, things like vipassana are basically, they're like almost synonymous with just like following the breath and some other things, but that's not what vipassana is. Vipassana is an extremely subtle type of conceptual analysis and or non-conceptual analysis. And you can't do that at all, not even the first bit of vipassana, not a tiny bit, not an atom of vipassana can be done without actual samadhi first. So there is a problem that in some Buddhist texts, the training that gets you to some particular result is called by the name of the result. For example, to accomplish fitness, right? Fitness is a state of body in which there is health all the time. The body is healthy. It's strong, it's flexible. There is sort of fine movements available of the joints and digits and blah, blah, blah. And there are gross coordinated movements of the body that are available to you, blah, blah, blah. So this is a state that is attained and maintained over a long period. So a fitness class is not fitness, right? A fitness class is something you do to gain fitness over a long period of time. In the same way, some types of meditation are called vipassana, not because they are vipassana, but because they are part of the process that at some time may lead to genuinely gaining the ability to do vipassana. So, for example, to gain vipassana, you need to gain skill in alternating between a highly focused state of mind and a state of mind that's analyzing from within that state of focus without losing the focus, right? And at first, as you analyze, the focus starts to go away, and then the whole mind is moving again. Or you're analyzing, and then you start to focus, and then the whole mind sort of seizes up and absorbs on whatever it is you were analyzing and stops the analysis. So for a long time, you can't sort of analyze with one part of the mind and keep the mind from, basically keep the mind undistracted, right? So you have to learn how to alternate these at first. And then once you gain full samadhi, you learn how to do the analysis conceptually or non-conceptually without the mind moving. Without it moving in any ways that you do not deliberately choose for it to move, right? Very important. Okay. So for those who are on the Buddhist path, the full and direct realization of the nature of reality, selflessness, and emptiness is only possible with a combination of samadhi or stabilizing meditation and vipassana or analytic meditation. So if you want to gain even just the entry level of realizing selflessness at the conceptual level, you still need to go through this process of developing samadhi. Just understanding selflessness as a concept is not the conceptual realization of selflessness. A valid inference, as it's called in the technical sort of sense in the Nalanda tradition, is a deep meditative experience. It is basically like you're contemplating these things in the best state of focus you can. You don't need full samadhi to be able to do this, by the way. You can do this at the third or fourth level of shamatha, which will be discussed in this course. And you're doing this analysis, and reality basically rips open in front of you, and you're just looking at the conceptual image of the emptiness and not everything else, right? So this will be an extremely profound experience, right? Because it's almost like looking in the fridge and seeing the jug of milk in front of you, right? Almost. Not quite. Not quite, because in the case of valid inference, you're looking at a correct conceptual image of selflessness or emptiness or impermanence. Now, the reason it's so profound is because your mind has gained enough concentration to sort of gray out everything else. And so you're just looking at that image itself. But it's still a conceptual image. But that conceptual image, with that strength, with that capability of mind, is so powerful, right? It's not a direct realization yet, but you will never, ever be the same after that experience. And it's incontrovertible. Incontrovertible. You will have no doubt, no matter what else happens in your life, that this emptiness stuff that we've been talking about for years and years, and this impermanence stuff and this selflessness stuff, yeah, I've got that, I understand that. You'll have no doubt, well, two things you'll have no doubt about: that the conceptual understanding you had prior to that experience was absolutely useless. It had no function. It didn't work to do anything until you combined it with some concentration, and you could see that conceptual image basically while ruling out everything else. And the second thing you'll have no doubt about is that emptiness is correct, selflessness is correct, impermanence is correct. Yes? No one can ever convince you again that this is not the correct position. This is an extremely powerful experience. And you don't even need full samadhi to get it. You just need the third or fourth level of calm abiding, right? Of shamatha. So I don't want to harp on that too much, but this is an extraordinary benefit of just going through this process of trying to gain samadhi in a genuine way and making a little bit of progress. Just a little bit of progress you can combine with the most profound aspects of practice and make your training basically in this life a permanently transformative type of training for the rest of time, right? If you have a valid inference, you're probably in good shape forever. I mean, and that's an extraordinary accomplishment. So this is just something that you can do on the road to gaining full samadhi. But you're not going to do, probably, if you're just doing this to try to feel a little healthier, or to get rid of pain in the body, or to make new friends, or just because it's something fun to do on a Friday night. Yeah? Okay. Finally, and I try not to talk about this too much, especially for those who are new to Buddhism or haven't really studied much philosophy of mind, or frankly haven't kept up with a lot of the science on sort of what's happening in physics and some other places that make these much more interesting kinds of conversations. But through training in samadhi, if you can gain the first level of samadhi, there are all sorts of side effects that should you so choose, you can aim to gain certain types of psychic capabilities. And a quick funny story. I'm fairly certain it was Ganden. Maybe someone, one of my Tibetan-speaking friends, will correct me and tell me it was a different monastery. But I'm fairly certain the Tibetan word Ganden means many doors, many doors. And at one time, one of the Gelug monasteries had so many adepts who had attained samadhi that people were walking through all the walls of the monastery all over the place. Because one of the capabilities you can develop is the ability to walk through objects that appear solid to other people but actually aren't solid. And so they started calling this monastery Ganden because everybody was walking through all these doors that weren't there for everyone else. Obviously, there were things like levitation, the ability to fly through the air, the ability to emanate, so to inhabit multiple bodies or multiple forms, whether those are conscious or unconscious forms, meaning that you can appear as an animal or as a stone for some useful purpose for some other person. The ability to walk on water or to dive into solid earth. Clairvoyance in the normal sense, meaning that clair meaning distant, if I'm not mistaken, voyance meaning to see, right? So you can see things at a distance. It's also called remote viewing. Clairaudience, you can hear things at a distance. Telekinesis, you can move objects or interact with objects using the mind. Much more importantly, you can know the thoughts and emotions of others directly. So you don't have to guess, what is this person like? What do they need? What are their dispositions? Blah, blah, blah. You can simply, by turning the mind to that person, know their history, their memories, the things that they need in order to continue progressing on the path, and so on. Which is why, in the end, you develop these kinds of capabilities, not to be able to like go into someone's house and move the picture frames around and make them think their house is haunted or something. In the end, these are all considered really to be side effects of the training. You shouldn't aim at these things because simply gaining these capabilities won't help you. It's like, I don't know, young people have really good eyes, and older people tend to have eyes that are a bit blurry, right? Having eyes that can see a little more can be helpful for some things, but it doesn't get you out of the problem. The fundamental problem of existence will not be solved by having eyes that are slightly better. In the same way, if you can see through the wall in front of you, it's like having eyes that are a little bit better. Or you can open a window in the building and look out that window, basically with your mind. So the fact that there are more windows in the building that we all happen to be in for you actually doesn't help in the end. It's just another temporary capability. It's like you've turned up the volume on one type of mental capability that is normally turned down a little bit for other people, but it doesn't help in the end. And in particular, if you get like a really big ego because you could do things like that, man, you're turning the way out into the way back in. Okay, let us return to the text. And today we're going to be talking about Maitreya's approach to developing a strong enough motive and a strong enough intent to actually complete the process of training and meditation. All right, here we are. Maitreya's approach. Good. All right, that looks good. So there's this text separation of the middle from the extremes, in which Maitreya explains to, I can't remember who, someone who's asking him questions, how it is that we come to directly know from experience the Four Noble Truths. The truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, excuse me, the truth of the cessation of suffering, and the truth of the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. Yes? And Maitreya gives a very interesting answer. He says, you can understand these truths directly from experience by carrying out the four foundations of mindfulness. And each foundation corresponds to one of the truths. So, to begin, the truth of suffering correlates to mindfulness of the body. Now, some people may be thinking, so I just need to get more into my body and, be aware of here are my fingers are here in space, blah, blah, blah. And therefore I will realize the truth of suffering. No, that's not what's being talked about here. And below, I'll discuss at much greater length what it is that Maitreya is recommending. The most important point, he says, is becoming aware of your body's susceptibility to being harmed and the susceptibility to dying. So, in other words, you need to become aware of impermanence. This is the critical point. And I find this point quite cogent, quite important for a number of reasons. But the next video, I think I'm going to cover the traditional Lamrim approach from the Gelug in a semi-traditional way, as is my custom. Because the Gelug approach basically recommends the same thing, right? It doesn't do so explicitly, it does so implicitly. How so? When you look at the Lamrim is divided into, Lamrim just means graded sequential, if I'm not mistaken, graded sequential stages. So the graded sequential stages put the first thing as understanding the relationship between you and the mentor, right? How do you properly rely on a teacher to get the most out of that relationship? That's the first big question, yes? The second big question is, how do you orient yourself in terms of aiming your intent at the proper stuff over and over and over again, and then motivating and energizing those intentions aimed at the proper things? And so once again, here we are. What is the first thing you need to do? Well, you need to become aware that, first of all, this opportunity you have to do this training is extremely precious. This is the first big point, right? It's extremely precious, extremely rare. And on top of that, it has so much meaning. So much meaning. And unfortunately, it can go away, boom, like that. Either you can become incapacitated in some way, or your teachers can go away, or you could die. It can go away in a flash, right? And so this is the second point in the Lamrim, which is often presented as the first point in other places, that we're impermanent. That life in general is short. There isn't much time to do this, even if this is all you're doing. Because most of our time is spent sleeping, eating, shitting, having sex, chasing it, working, traveling from one place to another place, getting dressed, getting undressed, doing the laundry, doing the dishes, cooking. Yeah. And then because of all that stuff we did, we need to relax. So then we need to relax. So there's not much time, actually. There's not much time to do this work. So the first big thing you need to do is become aware, this is a great, precious opportunity. Next, you need to realize it can go away very quickly, and there's not much time to do it. Even if I devote all my time to this, there's not much time, actually. So the sort of overlap here is quite strong. But what makes this presentation unique in Maitreya's approach is that he's tying them to the Four Foundations of Mindfulness. So let's just jump back and forth between the more robust explanation and the brief one. The truth of the cause correlates to mindfulness of feelings. So specifically, you become aware of how you are attached to pleasurable sensations. And this is the philosophical use of the word sensation, i.e., what your senses pick up, right? When you find some visual form likable, you want it. You want to have it, or you want to get close to it for a period of time, right? Or both. If you have it already, you don't want to lose it. Same thing. If there's some auditory sensation that you find pleasant, you want to get closer to it. You want to make it your own. If you already own it, you want to make sure that you don't lose it. If there's some taste that you like, you want to go to where you can find that taste again and again. You want to have a lot of that taste experience again and again while you're having it, and so on and so on. Unfortunately, we believe deep down right now that if we just turn all the right dials and flick all the right switches in our life, that we will somehow, by getting rid of enough stuff we don't like and getting enough stuff we do like in terms of these sensations, right? Get enough pleasure, get rid of enough pain, that finally we'll feel fulfilled, we'll feel satisfied, and somehow through manipulating everything, absolutely everything in the world, we'll feel, yeah. So through mindfulness of feelings, right? Looking at the feeling, not in terms of emotion here, but the direct, immediate reaction to sensation, right? Go back and read what a feeling is in the opening section of the text. So the feeling is just liking it or not liking it, or neither liking it nor not liking it, i.e. a neutral, right? So these are feelings. Feelings are in the Buddhist psychological sense, not the emotion. Emotion comes next, right? But the feeling comes right after the sensation. So first you see something, and then there's a sort of feeling that it's pleasant. You go, I like that. Just that. That's the feeling portion. And then the emotion comes, or the thought comes, I want that. And then maybe the emotion comes, right, after the thought, where there's this energy that comes up in the body, and you go, I'm like super motivated to get that. I'm going to go get it, right? So first you see it, then there's the, I like that. Then there's the, since I like that, I want to have it. And then there's the feeling that fills up the body and the mind that's like this motivating sensation, this motivating sort of energy and movement in the body, right, and the mind, I'm going to go get it, right? And that's the klesha. That's the disturbing emotion. That's the disturbing mental framework being expressed at a much grosser level. The concept part of it is also a disturbing mental state. It just doesn't have a lot of energy to it, right? So you can do a lot of work stopping it right there, but that's another topic for another day. So feeling, right? Just becoming aware of, there's a sensation, there's something appearing before my eyes or my ears or my nose or what have you, and just being aware, I like that. I don't like that. That's neutral. Becoming aware of that by itself gives you insight into the cause of suffering. Why? Well, arguably because you start to see, when my mind starts to crave after the pleasurable one and starts to crave getting rid of the unpleasurable one or the painful one, my mind is disturbed. Yeah? And so this is one of the fundamental causes that keeps the cycle of suffering turning. Why? Well, because when you really want something, aren't you motivated to do quite often terrible things or harmful things for yourself and others to get it? When you really don't want something, aren't you highly motivated? Don't you do harmful things to yourself and others to get rid of it? Yes, of course. So this is the cause of this cycle that goes on and on and on. Because once you do it, once you follow the impulse, you've now planted a seed in the mind, a habit, to go and do it again. Yeah. The truth of cessation correlates to mindfulness of mind, mindfulness of citta. Yeah. So by looking at the mind, you understand that attachment arises from misknowing and misperception of an inherent or self-existent I and mind, an unchanging I and mind, sort of existing as the pilot of the plane of the body and mind, but somehow different from the body and mind. So why would you notice that there is something wrong in the perceptual process and conceptual process that causes you to chase after pleasurable sensations and run away from painful sensations just by looking at the mind? Because the nature of consciousness doesn't include that ignorance. When you can gain a state of samadhi and look at what the mind is, right? Fundamentally, it doesn't actually include that ignorance. Yeah? Now, simply gaining a taste of the conventional nature of mind, luminous, clear, and knowing, will not remove ignorance. And you can do that for 10,000 years, 84,000 kalpas, if you'd like, and that still won't remove the ignorance. You have to do something else. This is the Buddha's big contribution to the spiritual journey. If you could just look at consciousness at a very subtle level, and that was all that was required, then the Buddha shouldn't have had anything to add to what his teachers were doing, because they did that already, and he learned that from his teachers. In any case, having enough subtlety of mind to get basically all of the junk out of the way and just look at what mind is. It's just clear and knowing and luminous. Yeah. And being able to ascertain that directly, it gets enough of the most gross, the most coarse level of your conceptual nonsense out of the way that you can directly identify what the problem is. You can see the I, the false I there, much more clearly. And they talk about this a lot in traditions like Zen, Chan, Mahamudra, Dzogchen. Basically, the traditions that use mind as the primary object of meditation in order to train in meditation, in addition to sort of training samadhi using something like the breath, right? Ones that immediately go to mind after using the breath, for example, always emphasize this point that once you can look at the mind in a subtle state of concentration and look in particular at the sort of non-physical aspect of mind, the spacious aspect of mind, it's really easy to identify what the problem is at a grosser or coarser state of awareness. Because right now you're in this state where there's constantly all of this turbulence on the surface of the mind. And so in the midst of that turbulence, to identify the little tiny pebble that is causing the turbulence, the pebble of misconception that is causing these massive waves of disturbance, is extremely difficult, right? So you turn the mindfulness, you look at the mind itself. This gives you insight into ignorance, which then gives you insight into the fact that, oh, if I remove this ignorance, I could attain a state that would actually be permanently peaceful, right? So meditation on the mind gives you insight directly into the truth of cessation. The truth of the path correlates with mindfulness of mental phenomena. Now, this is an interesting one. In so many words, the argument is that if you directly look at all of the mental formations that are occurring from moment to moment, and you become highly aware of, here's what this one is, here's how it functions, here's what it's doing, right? Here's mindfulness. The mental factor of mindfulness is like this, it's doing this. From moment to moment, I see it carrying out these activities. It becomes very clear over the course of time that certain types of mental behavior, certain mental formations, certain concepts, certain emotions are extremely beneficial, and some of them are extremely harmful. Some of them have a subtle benefit, some of them have a subtle harm. Some of the ones that have a gross benefit have a subtle harm. Blah, 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 blah. And so over the course of time, you start to sort of weigh up. Yeah? You start to weigh up, this one really helps. At this level, it helps a lot. I'm going to keep this going until the benefit is no longer needed. And then there's a subtle problem with this, and I'll get rid of that at that time, right? Great example of this in direct from the previous video, right? If you become extremely attached, you have intense desire, like a person with their hair on fire looking for a pond in which to dive. Regarding attaining samadhi, I'm going to attain samadhi no matter what, right? That can get you almost to the end. And then the motive itself becomes a subtle hindrance. And you need to basically get rid of that type of motive to complete the training in samadhi. But it can carry you really far. Really, really, really far. That's why it's there. So it has a coarse benefit that carries you almost to the end, and then you need to get rid of it because it has a subtle fault. Does this make sense? I hope this makes sense. So the truth of the path, right? The stages, the steps of the path become part of your direct experience when you can start looking at, here's what harmful mental activity is like. Here's what helpful mental activity is like. Here's what a harmful sort of a manifestation of the fundamental nature is like, or a non-constructive, something that is actually not doing any good work for me, for others, and the opposite. Yeah. And that's the path. The path is cultivating what's useful, what's helpful, what's true and real, and getting rid of what is harmful, unhelpful, doesn't help, and isn't real. It's quite direct. Shakyamuni Buddha says in the Kalamata Sutta, I'm bringing this up because this, oh goodness Christ, I mean this is one of the most misquoted, misunderstood, misused quotes probably anywhere in the Buddhist canon. It's viewed as basically sort of a big skeptic manifesto, and that's not actually what he's saying. So let's read it, okay? Don't go by reports, by legends, by traditions, by scripture, by logical conjecture, by inference, by analogy, by agreement through pondering views, by probability, or by the thought, this contemplative is our teacher. When you know for yourselves that these qualities are unskillful, these qualities are blameworthy, these qualities are criticized by the wise, these qualities, when adopted and carried out, lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them. When you know for yourselves that these qualities are skillful, these qualities are blameless, these qualities are praised by the wise, these qualities, when adopted and carried out, lead to welfare and to happiness, then you should enter and remain in them. Yeah. So Maitreya's approach really lines up with this type of advice. Yeah. You look directly at the components of the body and the mind, and this gives rise to direct knowledge about each aspect. And that direct knowledge then leads to further motivation to carry on with the training that you're doing. So a very elegant solution, and a solution that isn't exclusory with the previous approach. I hope that's clear. If you're highly motivated because of contemplating the benefits of meditation, then part of making that motivation more rich will be gaining these types of direct experiences. Then these types of direct experiences will also add fuel, add motivation, make your motivation much more mature than it was just by contemplating benefits. Oftentimes benefits you're not even sure are real. Although as you go along, you become convinced, oh wow, yeah, that part I thought wasn't real. Turns out that's a literal description of things that happen. Okay, so don't go by reports, legends, traditions, scripture, logical conjecture, inference, analogy. Now this is quite a bit of things we shouldn't be going by, including just that someone is our teacher and that we shouldn't just follow them because they're our teacher, right? This seems to fly in the face of a lot of other advice that the Buddha himself gives in the Pali Canon, which we could discuss another time. But he's very, very clear. You need to rely on your teachers to an incredible degree. That's not just a later Mahayana thing. That's something you find in the Pali Canon, and you find it in the early Pali commentaries. I mean, the early Pali commentators are, by today's standards, they'd be considered absolutely extreme. Like literally, if you need to die to follow your teacher's instructions, then die. I mean, that's how intense it is in the Pali tradition. So this is not. So this advice should be put in that context. Now, how do we combine this type of advice with that type of context and not create a contradiction? I think this is the key phrase, really. Basically, you gain enough experience that what has been reported to you is not simply a report. What has been handed down as sort of stories and legends and so on, like the Mahasiddha stories of India, they're not just legends, because those legends are now backed up with some direct experience. It's not simply the tradition, because the tradition has now been backed up with some direct experience of the training, right? It's not simply because it's listed in the scripture, but you have some direct experience. It's not simply logical conjecture, not simply inference, analogy, not simply sitting around with your friends and agreeing, yes, we both kind of agree that this is the right way to go. It's not just that it seems probable, right? Nor is it simply because your teacher gave you the advice. But You looked at it yourself, right? In using the training methods that you got from your teacher, the qualities praised by the wise, right? You looked at it yourself and you went, that description I heard is exactly right. You gained some more experience and you went, whoa, those legends I heard about, those are the real deal. Because now I'm having the experience that they talked about in the legend. Yeah? And in particular, most importantly, that when you adopt what the wise, what the teachers, what the great meditators say you should adopt, that the things they told you would happen start to happen. And that when you start getting rid of the stuff that they told you should get rid of, right? And you're cultivating the qualities they told you that you should cultivate, then the things they said would happen start to happen. Yeah? And as this process is sort of going from just concepts and just logic and just this and just the legends and just the inspiration, just the words of the teacher, and those start to become experience, right? As you start to make that transition, you start to more and more and more go, oh, wow, if I could gain this samadhi thing, like I got this little taste of this, if I could gain the full capability, that would be extraordinary. And I don't need anyone to tell me that would be extraordinary. I know that because I've tasted it. I've tasted enough to know. Yeah? So that's really what this advice is about. That it is necessary but not sufficient to do these things. Reports, legends, traditions, scriptures, logic, inference, analogy, agreement with other practitioners, the probability that something might be correct, the advice of your teachers. These are all necessary, but not sufficient in and of themselves. You must also apply the instructions. You must put all of this inspiration into practice. You must look at it yourself. You must chew it up and not just have the information in your head, but chew it up and apply it to your life again and again and again, and sit down and do the seated practice and look at it, boom, 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 until experience starts to occur. That's the point. And you're doing this with the help of the wise. Who are the wise? People that know more than you. Yeah? People whose level is here while you're here. It's really that simple. So, when we then inquire, right, what are the four foundations of mindfulness that Venerable Maitreya is recommending to us here? There are two sources, the Satipatthana Sutra and the Mahasatipatthana Sutra, right? Pardon me, I always say sutra, or in the Pali tradition we're suttas, right? The suttas. So, mindfulness of the body, which correlates with the suffering, with directly cognizing the suffering of samsara, right? The suffering itself, is broken down into several different things, right? So let's look at these. So the first foundation is, there's a whole bunch of, and these aren't direct quotes, I hope that's clear to everybody, but the first is the ongoing activity of breathing. So you're breathing all the time, yeah? So part of the mindfulness of the body is becoming aware that you're breathing. It's this beautiful life-sustaining thing that's going on all the time. The second is becoming aware of your posture, and several different postures and all sorts of ordinary activities like walking, laying down, sitting, and to start to do those things deliberately. You sit properly, you stand properly, you walk properly with full awareness of what you're doing. This is, by the way, why training in things like martial arts and yoga and dance and so on are such an exceptional support to this training, because you start to gain an awareness of what your breath is doing, what your posture is doing, what your body is doing throughout all of your ordinary activities. Next is the clear comprehension of sensory experiences. So knowing what you're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and tactile what's occurring in the tactile sense. Next, and this is why I said this is not simply sort of intense mindfulness of stuff going on, right? There's also a sort of studying component. If you study the repulsiveness of the body, I think there are 32 or 64 points of repulsiveness. And basically this is a conceptual analytical exercise where you look at what Shantideva would call sort of the horrors of the human body. Right? Shantideva is hilarious in this regard. His analysis is so visceral. He says, when you really consider it carefully, the human body is like a sack that's just filled with horrifying substances. Why? How could you be so bold as to make a statement of that kind? Well, as soon as somebody gets a little tiny cut, almost everyone is immediately horrified. As soon as you can see just a tiny bit inside, everyone's disgusted. Yeah? So in any case, there's a very elaborate set of contemplations that you go through where you're looking at, okay, here's exactly what the body is made up of. It's made up of hair, it's made up of sweat, it's made up of phlegm, it's made up of saliva, it's made up of the fluid around the eyes, it's made up of the fluid around the spine, the fluid around the brain, it's made up of the stomach acid, it's made up of the bile, it's made up of the partially digested food, it's made up of urine, it's made up of feces. The body is made up of all these organ systems, it's made up of the muscles, it's made up of the bones, it's made up of this big sack of skin that kind of sits on the outside. It's made up of the fascial and connective tissues. And so you go through what actually is this body, what is it made up of, and in this particular case, isn't quite a bit of this somewhat repulsive? Isn't it somewhat gross? Now, why would you do that? You do that because even though that method has a small fault, right? There's nothing inherently gross about the body. So there is a small fault. What is this technology being used for? It's being used to help you control your desire, right? You're trying to reorient your mind and get the mind to do what you want it to do without being distracted by the body and without being distracted by the bodies of other people. The next is the contemplation of the elements. This is another tough one for Westerners, but the elements in an Abhidharma sense are sort of atomized, which I think probably has some problems in terms of a scientific worldview. But if we de-atomize the discussion, so that we're not talking about atoms of a particular sort, but instead are talking about the experiential qualities of reality, this becomes an extremely helpful meditative tool and meditative model. So the four experiential elements of reality are that things are solid, right? There's a solid component. There's a liquid component, that things flow and conglomerate together. There's a fire element, in other words, heat or the lack of heat. So fire includes both heat and cold in this sense. And wind, which encompasses a number of things, but in particular movement, right? Gaseousness, right? The air that we're breathing, and movement. Wind also encompasses prana, chi, ki, lung in the Tibetan tradition. Now, this analysis of the four elements is often expanded to include two more. Space, which is not space-time. It is the mere absence of obstruction. So space in this sense would be the absolutely empty space in which space-time occurs. Right? That's a different kind of can of worms. And then, of course, the element of mind. So the fact that there is a clear, knowing, luminous component to your experience. However, we're doing the mindfulness of the body, so these two are not included. Finally, and importantly, is death meditation. Now, the death meditation that's found in the Pali Canon is much different, I think, than the Indian and then the Tibetan versions. So the death meditation here is mainly focused on just looking at the stages that a dead body goes through when it decays. And once again, the purpose here is to give you a very visceral, very immediate sense that you do not have a lot of time to get this work done, that it could end at any moment, and that when it does, this body will be like a rotting corpse, right? So anything that you're doing purely aimed towards this body that isn't in some way helping you to get this work done will be of no benefit whatsoever about 2 seconds after you're dead. That's the point. It's a heavy pill. It's a very heavy pill, especially if you're new to meditation. But this pill can be made much easier to swallow, I think, if you start with sort of the Lam Rim approach, the gradual stages approach, and first you look at preciousness. Why is this opportunity so precious? You know, what is it that makes this opportunity so rare, so meaningful? Then, on the basis of that, then you do this type of meditation. It's very profound. So the sequential stages. If you look up the medical versions of this type of information in the West, there are only, if I'm not mistaken, there are only 4 stages of decomposition according to medical people in the West. And at one point I knew what they were, but I don't anymore. This is a bit more elaborate and can be helpful if you develop in your mind sort of a standard set of images that you use. So the point is not to become fascinated by dead bodies. That's not the point. The point is to realize that your body will be like this. And therefore to help you orient your mind towards what's actually important in life. Yeah. So when you die, the body will first get stiff, and then it will go soft and be placid again, almost like a living body, but it'll be cold. And then all the bacteria in your gut and the bacteria on your skin and the bacteria all over the place, the body starts to bloat up, right? As that bacteria starts to eat the body from the inside out. And the body changes color. The blood pools on the low points of the body, and you get these big black marks underneath the skin. And the stomach swells. The pressure in the stomach starts to make basically makes your whole body kind of puff up, right? There's pressure in the center, so everything else gets pushed outwards. And so everything starts to swell up and look fat because of this. All the fluids get pushed out. You're going to shit yourself. You'll piss yourself. The eyes will sometimes bulge. Fluids will come out from every orifice of the body. It's horrific. And as the body starts to bloat and to smell, bugs are attracted, right? And so maggots start to eat certain parts of the body. Other bugs start to find their way in. If you were to die in the middle of nowhere, right, if you were in the woods, then after the insects started their work, at some point, animals, other, predators like wolves and foxes and what have you would show up and have their fill. Birds, in particular, vultures would show up. And new types of insects, actually. At every stage of decomposition, there are different types of bugs that come and they eat different stuff. So the first stage that the Pali Canon recommends that you contemplate is when the body sort of bloats up and you start to get the first things, right? The first things that show up are usually the flies. And they lay eggs in your nose, in your mouth, in your ears, around your anus, around your genitals, so that the maggots can find their way inside the body. So this is the first stage that you contemplate. And the way that you contemplate it is you imagine your body being like this. Then you imagine your body having been bloated and sort of starting to be eaten from the outside with fluids running all over the place, is now being eaten by different types of insects like beetles and some of the bugs that come along a bit later, by wild animals, by predators, by birds. Next, most of the flesh has been pulled off the body, but there are still tendons with a little bit of flesh on the bones, right? Because the animals have taken away most of the stuff. Now at this point, a lot of beetles show up and they eat the tendons and the remaining flesh and a little bit of blood off that fresh kind of skeleton. As time goes on, there'll be a little bit of sort of the blood and fluid still stuck to the skeleton, but the tendons will have been eaten away, right? Well, most of the tendons will be, most of the flesh will have been eaten away, but some of the tendons connecting the skeleton together will still be intact. Then the tendons are all that's left, but every bit of everything else has been cleared off the bones. Then the tendons get eaten and they get worn away, and then the skeleton starts to be sort of scattered about. So we've all seen this if you've been to the woods. You'll find a skeleton that's sort of still looks a little yellow, right? But the bones have started to sort of be scattered around. When you get to a more advanced stage, the bones will start to be white because they've gotten so clean from everything being eaten off of them, and they're scattered around and they get bleached by the sun. And so they're just bright white. Next, a skeleton bleached white by the sun, more than a year old, and heaped into an anonymous pile. So this is a bit tough in the Western context because we don't have open graveyards like they did in India at the time. But under some circumstances, in charnel grounds where bodies were being burned and there were body parts and old skeletons and these things much more open than we would have them in the West, there would be just sort of piles of bones from people who had died, especially if nobody knew who they were, just sort of sitting around. So maybe for us, you can imagine something like the catacombs, or if you've ever been to the Chapel of Bones in Portugal, or look up a video from that, and just imagine that at some point, maybe if you are buried in the West, you're underneath a headstone, but the headstone at some point gets too old. So go to a graveyard and look at the headstones. Once it gets too old, you can't read it. And so underneath there's just this anonymous pile of bones. No flesh, nothing left. But these bones that are not even connected to each other anymore. And the final stage is that the bones themselves get old and rotten and basically get ground to dust. So now you can't even identify the skeleton. And once again, if you've ever been in the woods and found a little piece of bone, you can't even, with the eye, usually you can't even tell what type of animal it was. And finally, there's nothing left. The dust has been completely spread, and there's no body at all. No identifiable body at all. It has completely become other things. Right? So this contemplation is meant to help you overcome your attachment to your own body, so that you can do the work that's required with the mind while you still have time. That's the purpose of this. Ooh, okay, that was pretty heavy. Satipatthana Sutta also describes mindfulness of feelings. Of course, again, important to note this is Vedana where feelings is actually referring to pleasurable, painful, and neutral. I'll put that in here. If I can spell. Oh, thank you. Pleasurable, neutral, and painful bodily sensations. So not emotions, right? Emotions are actually conceptual activity. So how does a monk live contemplating feelings in feelings? So feelings in feelings, it's sort of like a Pali expression where you say something in something, meaning to sort of do something single-mindedly. And I'm not sure if there's an expression quite like this in the West. I mean, I guess sometimes we say something like, he was a gentleman hidden within a gentleman, right? And what we mean is that there's absolutely no pretense. There's nothing in the way. There's not some second layer. You just look at it directly as it is. So feelings in feelings means to look at something single-mindedly without distraction. So if you're observing bodily sensation, for example, just the tactile sensation of this is, the sensation of clothing on the skin, the sensation of warmth on the skin, the sensation of hunger, whatever it is, that while you're doing that, you don't let yourself be distracted by taste, sound, smell, vision, thoughts, meaning just concepts, or emotions, meaning sort of the highly energized concepts that then sort of take on tactile components. Herein, a monk, when experiencing a pleasant feeling, knows I experience a pleasant feeling. When experiencing a painful feeling, he knows I experience a painful feeling. When he experiences a neither pleasant nor painful feeling, he knows I experience a neither pleasant nor painful feeling. This goes on. So when the feeling is sort of an ordinary bodily feeling, you know that, and so on and so on. A painful spiritual feeling, same. We were just contemplating the sort of horrific process of our own body, right? That our body's going to go through, and it generates sort of a disgust, a bit of sadness, perhaps, right? At some point, the sadness should go, but a little bit of the disgust might stay, right? And a sense of urgency ultimately is what we want to gain. An urgency that, I have to make use of this meat suit while it's still in good condition to do the work that needs to be done, right? And that feeling, that urgency, is, like other types of urgency, a bit uncomfortable. Yeah? And so you go, this slight feeling of uncomfortableness is a element of the path that I'm using as a tool to motivate me to get to a certain stage on the path, right? At some point, being uncomfortable in that way won't have a function. But until you get to that point, you need the sort of ordinary motivation for a normal person that is generated by being uncomfortable to get the work done. Yeah. In any case, at the level of feeling, you would, for example, generate the urgency to do something with this precious human life that you have, to train this mind while you have time, using this body, right? And the urgency arises as a subjective experience. I have to do something. And then, rather than sort of following the inclination of that, you turn the mind itself towards the urgency, and you look at the urgency itself. And you know directly, this urgency is slightly uncomfortable. That element where you go, there's a bit of pain associated with this, right? That pain is the feeling component, according to Buddhist psychology. Yeah. Now, the danger a lot of people get into when they're doing sort of the first type, where they're sort of generating some of these kind of unpleasant motivations to do stuff, is that they don't know what to do really once they have that motive. And so they make themselves depressed, or they make themselves really anxious, but they don't actually have enough of the path under their belt in terms of a conceptual understanding to know what to do next. And so then they quit doing the contemplations associated with those types of motivations because they suck, right? They're painful. So there's two options. You can either stop doing the contemplation that creates this new emotion that you don't like, right, to get rid of the pain, or you can follow the path, which actually gets rid of all pain forever. These are the options, right? In any case, at the level of feeling, a lot of extra instructions here, but at the level of feeling, the mind is placed on some sensation that's coming up. That could be any type of physical sensation or even mental types of sensation associated with things like urgency or metta, right? You generate metta and you look at it directly. Oh, it's quite pleasant, quite nice. I like this, right? Or you generate equanimity and you go, oh, equanimity is not, it's not pleasant, it's not unpleasant, it's just peace. Oh, that peace is quite nice. It's not pleasurable, but it's very comfortable. It's very soothing, right? So in any case, you start to look at the feeling component, and to remind you, this feeling component then gives you insight into the cause of suffering. What is the cause of suffering? Since we're sort of in the Pali model, the main driver, if you will, of the process is craving, tanha, right? So what are you craving after? You're craving after these feelings. You want the pleasurable stuff, and you crave to get rid of the feelings and the sensations, really, that have feelings you don't like. So this gives you insight into the cause of the cycle. Next, the Buddha is talking about mindfulness of mind, right? And the Buddha pairs this up in the suttas that are concerned with mindfulness. He pairs these up into sort of opposites, right? So you can look at attachment, raga, right? You can look at attachment. At some point in this text, we're going to talk about what raga is. Attachment can be translated, sensuality, greed, desire, lust, grasping, craving, sensuality, passion. And because it's been translated 10 different ways, I think most people are confused. But the term is raga, right? What does it mean? It means that you think that by getting enough of a particular type of sensation that you like, that you will be fulfilled. In other words, if I could just look at enough beautiful flowers, I would be permanently satisfied. So you go get a job at a flower shop, you're looking at flowers all day, and at some point you go, holy crap, if I have to look at another flower, I'm just gonna die. Right? So attachment is sort of the lie, the internal lie, that you think by getting enough sensation, enough sensory experience that is pleasant, that you will feel fulfilled, satisfied, happy, stable, safe. And it's not true. So when you're observing the mind, you observe that state of mind coming up. Oh, if I can get more of that, I'll be happy. And you observe a state of mind where it's absent. The only state of mind where it's absent is going to be some type of meditative state, right? Attachment's there basically all the time. Because all the time, there is something in your smell, taste, touch, hearing, etc., almost all the time, that is associated with, if I could get more of that, I'd be happy. Or the opposite of that, aversion, whose Sanskrit term is slipping my mind, but again, we'll cover this at some point in this text. Aversion has so many translations. Anger, disliking, oh gosh. In any case, aversion means the opposite of attachment. You think that when there's some sensation, right? You have there's like some sort of tingling in your left shoulder, right? And you look at that tingling, and your mind goes, I don't like that, right? Oh, I don't want that sensation in my body. And so you go like this, trying to figure out, oh, what do I need to do with the shoulder to make the tingling stop, right? And you think, oh, if I could just make the body be free of all of these little finicky sensations I don't like, then I'd be happy. Oh. But I guarantee you, all of us who have been wiggling on our cushions for years to get rid of some sensation we didn't like in the body aren't happy. And the people who sat quite still, dealing with the sensations they didn't like in the body, and made much more progress in meditation than people like me, they're doing much better. Yeah? They're doing much, much better. So, same thing here. We look at, this is aversion. This is me going, if I could get rid of these sensations I don't like, I'd be happy. And this is the absence of aversion. Right? We look at ignorance, Pali avidya, and the absence of ignorance. These are the three poisons. These are the three main problems that you have. Oh, how to talk about ignorance. Ignorance is the opposite of what's true, right? Unfortunately, when we look at any object, even in direct meditation, even with a direct yogic cognition, there is ignorance present. There is the ignorance that sees the knower as existent in and of itself, and there is the ignorance that sees the object being known as existent in and of itself, or there's the ignorance that sees the non-duality, the inseparability of these two, almost being one thing as existing in and of itself. When in reality, the only things that exist are relational. Everything that exists within a relationship of some kind, right? There is no thing that exists in and of itself, by itself, of itself. There are some people that try to live for themselves. But this is not really the point. The point is that ignorance can actually be translated and has been adopted. There are at least four major schools of ignorance, starting with the Indian schools. And amongst those, the sub-schools it's sort of a head-spinning thing. I think there's something like 22 or 26 different versions that are slightly different from each other. But they're not mutually exclusive. They're actually simply a matter of depth, right? So the sort of most nuts and bolts version of this teaching really only concerns persons. But we don't need to go into all that detail. In any case, so you look at the ignorance, you look at the absence of the ignorance. Now remember, this is meant to be helping you directly understand what is the cause of suffering. What is the cessation of suffering, right? And that this is a real possibility. So by looking at, here's attachment, here's aversion, here's ignorance, here's how they come up, here's how they're caused, here's what they do, here's how they function, and seeing those things directly for yourself in your own mind, you start to go, wow, well actually the ignorance is behind the attachment and aversion. The attachment and aversion are behind all of my terrible things that I always do, and this is why I'm suffering. If I could get rid of the ignorance, I'd be done. I'd be out. I'd be finished. A mind with lethargy or laxity, and a mind free of lethargy or laxity. So now this is starting to talk about the the qualities of a mind that is training really hard in samadhi, right? So we'll talk about lethargy and laxity as we go. Same thing, restlessness and a distracted mind versus a stable and undistracted mind. A mind that has developed an entered jhana state versus one that has not. Looking at a mind that is in the desire realm, which is where our mind is now. In other words, completely consumed with the objects of the five senses. Versus a mind that has generated the first jhana, or above, which is a state of mind that is no longer reliant on the ordinary five senses. The formless realms are a refinement of the form realm capabilities. So in the form realm, you're relying on mental image, right? In the formless realm, you're no longer relying on mental images. So an example of a formless concentration would be something like metta, right? And they actually talk about in the Pali Suttas that if you do a lot of meditation on metta without also meditating on wisdom, the opposite of ignorance, then you end up in a state of mind, a state of existence after you're reborn that concords with the type of meditation you were doing. The meditation you were doing didn't involve a mental image and didn't involve a physical body. And so you just continue in a state similar to that one when you're reborn. It's not that like God comes down and goes, yes, my son, here we go to the God realm with you. No, just while you were on your deathbed, you entered a meditative state that had certain types of qualities, and then you just continued in that state after you died. That's it. Single-pointed concentration versus states that are not single-pointedly concentrated. Free states of consciousness. In other words, if you could generate a direct cognition of the emptiness of persons and the emptiness of phenomenon, that you can then compare that against states where you're not doing that. In other words, if you become an Arya being, a noble being, then you can enter states of meditation like that, basically whenever you want to. And so you can compare that against the other one. So, here's my ordinary state of mind. It's like this. These things go on. This is what happens. And here's the state of meditation in which I'm looking at the way things actually are. Here's what it's like. Here are its properties, blah, blah, blah. So as you dive deeper into this meditation on the mind, you're probably starting to see why yes, of course, you understand the possibility of gaining full freedom for the mind if you're going through these stages, right? Of course. Finally, there is meditation on mental objects. So there's again a huge host of meditations here listed in the Pali Canon. So I'm not exactly sure what to say about these. But basically what one is doing is gaining sort of a taste of one level of actual freedom of mind, and then removing, basically gaining enough sort of, almost like climbing a mountain, right? You're climbing a mountain, you go around a corner, and you're able to see from there, oh wow, the next part of the mountain, that I can see the place I'm going to climb to here now, and I can also see the path behind me. Here's all the stuff, right? Here's all the stuff behind me, and you can see where you are. Here's the bit of path I need to walk to get up to this next part. So you gain a certain level of capability. From that level of capability, you can see where you are, where you've been, and what needs to be done to get to the next stage. You can also see, here are all the benefits of getting to the next stage, right? In the same way that we did with samadhi. You thought about all the benefits, you got motivated to get there, you did the work, you got there. Okay, now from there, there's a new level. of capability, a new level of subtlety, a new level of freedom, especially if you're talking about the Mahayana path. This process goes very, very deep. It's called the Bodhisattva levels, where you're successively removing subtler and subtler and subtler problems from the process of cognition and the process of conception. And this is how you eventually gain the omniscience of a Buddha. There's also arhat levels, or sometimes called shravaka levels, hearers levels. And same thing. If you just want to become an arhat, just to attain nirvana for yourself and enter that nirvana after death, there are a series of stages where you're removing subtler and subtler and subtler problems, so that at the time of death you don't basically absorb on something like entering a state of metta, which will only take you to the God realms. And then after several thousand years as a metta God realm being, you just fall back into an existence like this one or worse. And instead, by steps and stages, looking where you are, seeing what the next step is, getting motivated to get there, getting there, blah, blah, blah. You remove all of the things that are getting in the way of liberation, moksha, nirvana, eventually attaining full arhatship, right? Okay. So then you can see that the path, when you start looking at the steps and stages, here's what needs to be adopted, here's what needs to be abandoned at each step and each stage, becomes direct experience by directly looking at the mind with subtler and subtler states of mind. Yeah? When you get to a subtler state of mind, you can see new layers of problems. You get motivated to solve those problems. You see that they are indeed problems. And then you solve the problem. And then you go to the next stage, and on and on and on. So like this, that is the path. So Maitreya's approach, in summary, in separating middles from the extremes, is to become aware of the truth of suffering through mindfulness of the body, the truth of the cause through the mindfulness of feelings, which are not emotions. These are liking, not liking, and neutral relative to what's occurring to the senses. Truth of cessation correlates to mindfulness of mind. So looking at all of these different layers of what's going on in the mind, right? As you go through the process of getting to samadhi and getting your first taste of emptiness. And the truth of the path is, from that perspective, having gotten to the first level of samadhi, gotten the initial direct realization of emptiness, you can then see, oh, here's what's standing in the way of me bringing this sort of momentary realization of emptiness to full fruition. And getting rid of all of these problems is definitely what I need to do. Accumulating more not accumulating, but accumulating is probably fine. Accumulating more of the right stuff to continue this process of getting rid of all this junk that's in the way is the next step. And then there are subtler and subtler and subtler steps that need to be taken. And that's the path to freedom from suffering, right? And so Maitreya is advocating sort of a step and stage process where from where you are, from what you can see right now, you start to use reason and direct experience together, along with the instructions of a teacher, right? He doesn't mention this in this particular text, but again, this is the bread and butter of the Pali tradition. If you read Buddhaghosa's commentary on the Pali Canon, he's a 4th century pundit who basically took all of the previous commentaries, most of which no longer exist, unfortunately, and he took the entire Pali Canon and he made one big text whose name I cannot pronounce. In English, it's called The Path of Purification. And he basically lays out in steps and stages, here's how you do all the work of Buddha's mind training, from step 1 to step Z. Yeah, from A to Z, 1 to 100. Mixing my metaphors. In that text, he spends a lot of time talking about the relationship between students and teachers, and basically his opinion is this: if all you're concerned with is ethics and a little bit of character development, you don't need a teacher for that. You can read a book. He doesn't say this, but again, you can read a book, you can listen to Dharma talks online, you can, you don't need a mentor for that. It'll help if you had a mentor, but you don't have to have one, right? Like if you just think about stuff, you will want to be a better person. You'll want to do more to help other people. You'll want to do more to help yourself. Where the teacher comes in, according to Venerable Buddhaghosa, is when you start the path of meditation. Basically, the tendency to fool ourselves is so overwhelming. The tendency to go the wrong way once you turn the attention inwards and to misinterpret what is happening, what you're seeing, whether or not, some experience you had was important or just a fantasy, is so difficult. And I'm going to be talking about that at some length. All sorts of weird stuff can and will happen when you turn the attention inwards for the first time. And when you try to do it in a serious way, all sorts of weird stuff occurs. And none of it matters. But you'll think it matters if you don't have a teacher. You'll think it's all sorts of profound stuff if you don't have teachers that are good mentors. Not only that, a teacher is meant to be sort of like a doctor, right? The Buddhist canon and all the commentaries they have, it's like a pharmacy of mental tools to develop yourself, to be able to finish the process of training, to become strong enough to bring the process of training to completion. And I mean, imagine going into the back part of a pharmacy by yourself and trying to find the pill that you should take without a prescription from your doctor. It's kind of like you go on Google and you put your symptoms into WebMD or whatever, and it comes back and every single time it says you have cancer. So if it were up to you, right, you would read the book, decide you have cancer, go to the pharmacy, buy the cancer drugs, and start chemotherapy, right? Does that sound intelligent? I hope it doesn't. The role of the teacher is to go, no, you don't have cancer. This is actually just a stomach ache. And for the stomach ache, you need like antacids, maybe for a couple weeks, just to chill things out. And then your stomach will be strong again. And then you can just carry on living a healthy life. Yeah. Okay. So on the Buddhist path, exactly the same way. It's a pharmacopoeia of tools, mental tools, to train yourself, to develop yourself, to get going in the right direction, to stay motivated. If you don't know what those tools are for, you can hurt yourself. If you're a capable, strong-willed person, you can hurt yourself. You can hurt yourself really bad. You can set yourself back from where you are now. You can make yourself worse. Mentally, emotionally, you can screw yourself up really bad. And I know quite a few people who had more determination than they had good sense and good mentorship, who basically made themselves into like way worse than they started by doing meditative training without good help. Okay? So it is my advice to try to find good teachers. Once again, I'll remind everyone I'm not a teacher. I'm just a fellow traveler on the road here. If anything, I'm more like an older brother who's elbowing people in the ribs and ruffling their hair. That's what I'm here for. So for today, that covers it. If you have any questions, reach out to me on Facebook, on YouTube, or by email, whatever's convenient. I'm happy to chat anytime within reason. This channel is supported by contributions to Patreon. If you'd like to support my personal practice and the work that I'm doing on this channel, please head over to my Patreon. The link is in the description. The money from that only goes towards supporting my own training. In other words, paying for classes related to Buddhism, buying books related to Buddhism, going on retreats related to my Tai Chi training or my Buddhist training, or my PhD work, which is in the realm of Buddhism. So all of these texts are more or less in exactly the same lines as what we're doing now. Or it goes towards supporting Buddhist causes of some kind. So that could be humanitarian, or it might be related to just supporting monks and nuns in general, because they survive on donations. So anything you donate to me on Patreon is going to be used for one of those three purposes, okay? If you're unable or don't want to donate, that's completely fine. I'm not intending to become rich here. I genuinely just want you to do better, train harder, learn faster in whatever tradition you're currently training in. That is the point. In any case, thank you so much for tuning in. And I hope to see you again soon. I should be back next week, maybe a bit earlier than Friday, so probably only be a few days. In any case, I will see you very soon. Ta-ta.